I still vividly remember when I got my driver's license. I jumped in the driver's seat of my parents' green Ford Escort, popped in a CD with a mix of songs I downloaded from Napster for this very occasion, sped off down the road feeling like the freest person on earth. Of course, I didn't really have anywhere to go, so I ended up driving around aimlessly for a little while, and then I eventually stopped at CVS and bought some Red Bull and gum, and then headed back home. And so it wasn't much of an adventure, but I pulled back into my driveway feeling like I'd returned from some sort of expedition. I'd only gone to the pharmacy and purchased $3.50 worth of items, but the important thing is that I went there. I went there myself, alone, independently. It was just me, the open road, and my illegally downloaded early 2000s alt-rock playlist. Every adult my age or older has a similar experience and remembers it well. It's one of the iconic moments of your teenage years, your first time driving on your own, the first time being, or at least feeling, fully independent. And of course, a lot of people also remember their high school proms and graduations and stuff like that. I remember those only vaguely and as overall sort of lame and overrated experiences. But this, driving, this lived up to all the hype. It is the real modern American rite of passage, or at least it was, because all of this seems to be changing. And like so many other changes these days, not for the better. According to a new study, Gen Z seems to be the first generation of young people to have little to no interest in driving. The New York Post reports, quote, Zoomers are seemingly rewriting the teenage rite of passage script, opting for tech over tires as they steer a cultural shift away from the traditional rush to the open road. New research from Market Watch Guides found that the youngest group of drivers, ages 19 and under, make up only 1 in 25, or approximately 3.6% of licensed drivers in the U.S. Taking all drivers under age 25 into account brings the combined percentage to 11% of the driving force. In the past, getting a license at 16 was an integral milestone in the journey toward adulthood. But 2021 data from the Federal Highway Administration indicated the percentage of 16-year-olds who had a license had dropped to 25% from 46% in the 80s. Now, I fully understand that you as an adult driver on the road, might be thinking to yourself, okay, fewer dumb kids driving. What's the problem? And I certainly understand that attitude, but it is actually a problem. And I'll explain why. But first, it's important to understand that this is a real observable trend, not just a matter of anecdotes. In a report a few months ago, Newsweek also noted that Gen Z is choosing not to drive. You don't have to go all the way back to the 1980s to see how stark this decline has been. Reading from the article, quote, Gen Z, the generation born after 1997, appears to be less enamored by the prospect of driving than previous generations, according to consulting firm McKinsey, with potential implications for the future of the car industry. This group of Americans is less likely to have a license than its older counterparts at the same age. McKinsey points out that in 1997, 43% of 16-year-olds and 62% of 17-year-olds held a license. But those numbers have dropped substantially, and by 2020, only 25% of 16-year-olds and 45% of 17-year-olds have a driver's license, consulting firm said, citing data from the U.S. Federal Highway Administration. If you owe back taxes or still have unfiled returns, that can really weigh on your mind, especially when the IRS has become more determined than ever. Their chief data and analytics officer revealed that the IRS is focused on an enforcement project with an average return on investment of about $6 for every $1 spent. They're targeting individuals and businesses that currently owe back taxes or haven't yet filed their returns. Tax Network USA, the nation's leading tax relief firm, knows the tax code and will fight for you. With a record of negotiating over $1 billion in tax relief for their clients, their team is knowledgeable in handling any type of tax issue. Whether you owe $10,000 or $10 million, they can help. Even if you don't have all your business or personal records from over the years, they can still get you filed up to date. Facing the IRS without a professional is not a smart move, so contact Tax Network USA for the best strategic advice to help reduce or even eliminate your tax debt. Call today at 1-800-245-6000 or visit their website at tnusa.com/Walsh. They'll give you a free private consultation on how you can settle your tax debt. That's tnusa.com/Walsh. Now, the question, of course, is why the Zoomers have given up on driving. Some of the reporting on the trend seems to want to position this as a bold, revolutionary new approach to life, but there's nothing bold about it, and very much the opposite, in fact. What's fueling this trend is the same thing fueling every other aspect of life for the younger generations. They're lazy, they're scared, and they're addicted to their phones. Gen Z isn't driving because it takes effort to learn, and they don't want to make the effort. There's risk involved, and they don't want to take the risk. And it's something that requires you to look up from your phone, and they certainly don't want to do that. Back to the New York Post, quote, social media access and texting have eliminated some of the need to meet up with friends to socialize as teens and young adults might have in the past. Even the workforce has changed, with a larger percentage going hybrid or completely virtual since the COVID pandemic. Mental health could also be to blame, with the anxious generation tag getting slapped onto Gen Z increasingly often. On some level, fear of car accidents could also be the blame for the driver drop-off. Quote, the reality is tens of thousands of people die every year in car accidents, David Strawn, a senior automotive journalist and researcher at MarketWatch Guides, said. That was much more an accepted risk, perhaps for previous generations, and I think that it's very logical to be scared of driving a car. The most dangerous thing most people do is driving to work in the morning and driving home in the evening. Well, we all learned from that quote that David Strawn probably should not be on the roads either, because it is, in fact, not logical to be scared of driving. It's rather the result of crippling and unreasonable anxiety. The Today Show recently interviewed a 23-year-old woman who is representative of this unreasonable driving fear and anxiety. Watch.
Nationwide, driving schools report teens are foregoing licenses not just in cities where public transport's easier, but in less populated areas too. 23-year-old Madison Morgan grew up in rural Washington state and still doesn't have a license.
Driving is honestly just very anxiety-inducing. When I would practice with my parents, a lot of times it would end in tears.
Now working in Seattle, she takes the bus to work, but says her parents still beg her to learn how to drive so she can have more options career-wise.
They want me to get a license so that if I ever wanted to move, that I wouldn't be as limited. But why would I want to have my own car when I can just go on an app and someone else in their car can just drive me around?
Yes, why would you want to have any semblance of independence or self-sufficiency when you can just be entirely dependent on other people to do everything for you? What exactly is the problem with young people not driving? Well, there are a lot of problems, but let's focus on the two big ones first. This is another basic life skill that a huge number of adults will now lack. And this decline in life skills has been happening for decades now, of course, but it's now reached a troubling threshold. Many adults in my generation, for example, don't know how to change a tire. A survey back in 2016 measured this and found that even 8 years ago, 60% of drivers were not confident in their ability to change a tire. And now we're entering a world where millions of adults don't know how to change a tire on the car and also don't know how to drive the car. Now, it's not as much of a problem for people to lose the ability to operate a piece of technology if that technology itself is antiquated. Almost everybody in Gen Z would be clueless about how to make a phone call with a rotary phone, but they'll never have to deal with a rotary phone, so that's all right. Who cares? The problem is that Gen Z is just as dependent on cars as people have been for the past many decades. It's just that they don't know how to operate the cars. They need other people to do it for them, which means that people are increasingly becoming more dependent, more vulnerable, more helpless with each successive generation. There really is no silver lining to a trend like that, at least not one that overrides the downside. Second, older generations have always complained about the younger generation. That's true. This is a time-honored tradition going back to the time of Socrates and long before that, but the nature of the complaints has changed in a disturbing way. Old fogies like myself used to complain that the young whippersnappers are too wild, too reckless, too sure of themselves, too prone to taking unreasonable risks, too rebellious, and so on. Well, now that's been flipped entirely on its head. The younger generations now are too scared, too anxious, too risk-averse, too shy, too complacent. These are deeply troubling characteristics because they're so unnatural for young people. For millennia, since the dawn of human civilization, to be young was to be adventurous to a fault, taking unnecessary risks, being a bit foolhardy and arrogant, trying to conquer the world and thinking it could be done all in a day. Now that spirit of adventure has been almost completely extinguished. And the good news, I guess, is that many young people aren't taking foolish risks anymore. And that is good news. You don't want to take foolish risks. But that's because they refuse to take any risks at all. Rather than lacking fear, which has historically been the folly of youth, they have far too much fear about everything. Driving is a microcosm of the larger problem. When I was a teenager, my parents got very upset with me because I drove too fast and too far, and I stayed out too late with the car. I was very much too much enjoying the independence of having a car. But now parents are upset for the opposite reason. They're upset because their kids won't drive at all or go anywhere or do anything. Now, yes, this means that they'll be physically safer in a certain sense for now. at least until obesity kills them down the line. The downside of youthful risk-taking and adventurousness is that, injuries, accidents, even death can occur. And all of that is very bad, obviously. A youth culture dominated by laziness and complacency and anxiety and fear will help you avoid those tragic outcomes, but it will also keep you from living a real human life, developing basic and necessary skills, achieving anything great or anything, period. The energy of youth is supposed to be the thing that propels you into adulthood and sets you on a path to success. What happens when the youth have no energy? When they're content to just sit around and remain dependent and powerless and feeble forever? Well, I guess we're going to find out the answer to that question, and my guess is that we won't like the answer very much. And that is why the driving-averse Zoomers are today canceled. Thanks for checking out this video. If you'd like to listen to my full podcast on the go, you can check out The Matt Walsh Show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.